So in life, we have things that disrupt our schedule. We don't, that we have we have certain we set on things in life and schedule, and suddenly something comes and disrupts that schedule. So the question, by the way, there's no textbook for this class, but I advise you all, the textbook that you should have is a notebook to take away your own texts. So how do we deal with those things in life that come and obstacles that come in our way, whether it be things that we don't expect, whether it be a sudden illness, an emergency that forces us to put our life on hold. And when all our plans, suddenly we have plans, schedules, goals, this, and suddenly that all goes out the window when these distractions happen. So I want you to think about it. If we want, we could discuss it. But for right now, think about if you were to rank yourself on your equilibrium when things like that happen in your life. Just for a moment, think about it. When things don't go your way, what would you rate your equilibrium in such situations? Or how do you respond? Think about it on yourself. How do you feel? What do you feel? What do you tell yourself?
Moshe, I think it depends on the circumstances. There are certain things, obstacles in life or things that happen that are tragic, that are financial. There are different things. You react differently to different things.
So I'm talking about things that are, whether they turbulent, transient things in general. I'm not getting into specifics now. I'm just talking about any situations, whether it be turbulence or whether it be a transitional or transient thing that disrupts your life.
That's my point. If, for example, you lost your job, you would think one way. You think, well, what am I going to do next? Step back, try and find out what your strengths are and your weaknesses, and start preparing a resume, whatever you're going to do. If it's a death in the family, is another thing. If it's thing like a pandemic, which is out of your control, it's the third thing. So there are plenty of things, and each one is a different methodology.
They're not all on the same. They're not all on the same scale. 100%. But I'm just talking about in general, just to get the idea from it, to do an own self-evaluation when things aren't going the way you expect, how you will rate your own equilibrium. Okay? Now, just give you another minute to think.
I think for me, I would, I'd pray and I'd turn to Psalms.
I'm not asking for solutions. I'm just asking you to make your own self-evaluation, how you feel like you fend in these situations.
Oh, okay.
So I would say that many of us become disorientated when there's unexpected turns in our life. We know where we're going. We have certain ideas and trajectories, the way we like things, and we get into a certain comfort of knowing how things are, and we tend to as humans box ourselves in a certain comfort and like to stay in that comfort. And when things don't veer the course that we expect them to, we often, some are better with change, some are less good with change, but for majority of us, we tend to meet those obstacles or meet those changes with resistance and sometimes even rejection. As Charles mentioned, what are we supposed to do if we're not in control? What are we meant to do? So the idea of this class is to give you perspective. Perspective in the sense that what if we're able to see things in different light? What if we could come to a realization, and this is more of a, it's very good and well in theory. That's why I want you to write things down for yourself. But what if we were able to really get the perspective that in life, we are not in charge. And what is going on in our lives in the world, there's more than we know. There's more than we are aware of. And one of those ways is the way to really get that perspective is by cultivating and meditating and realizing the role that divine providence plays in our life. And we can, when we start to realize what the way divine providence plays out in your life, we can find thereby in every situation, there's meaning and there's opportunity. I can't think of another individual in our generation that coming from the world that he came from a crippled nation post-Holocaust, and the outlook of the way Judaism was to unfold was certainly not the brightest. In fact, if you look throughout Jewish history, post-Holocaust, there were many that predicted that there would be, within 50 years, less than 2 million people because the rest would be assimilated. And yet, the Rebbe had changed that whole perspective. He was able to bridge two worlds, post-Holocaust into the world where he was filled and he gave people the hope and optimism, and Judaism, how Judaism has flourished and grown over the past 50 years. And why I bring that is because the Rebbe did it with a perspective that he had. He saw things that we couldn't see and didn't see. And thereby, the reason why I bring that is because there are many encounters that people had with the Rebbe and stories that are the Rebbe, that the encounters are more than just the miracles. The Rebbe wasn't just a person that performed, a holy man that did miracles, but through these encounters and through these stories, he really showed us a perspective, a way to think. And the course, what it does is it takes those stories and gives us a perspective on how to utilize that way of understanding and that way of thinking into our own situation. So in the first story that it brings on this topic that we are talking about is a story by a lady, and some of these stories are actually recorded, and some of them are, I think it would be better to hear it from the person themselves saying it. So this is the first story, and I'll share it with the person herself that said it.
Swerdlove is a veteran educator living in Brooklyn, New York. In the late 1960s, she took part in a convention of the Neshei Chabad Women's Organization in Detroit, Michigan.
Neshei Chabad Convention in Detroit, Michigan. Let's say 20 ladies went, figure out how many children did we leave at home. Baruch Hashem, on Ainor. We were supposed to be home by 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Husbands knew what to do with the kids until that time. The Rebbe had geholfen. There was a terrible snowstorm. Airport in Detroit closed down. So all the ladies are sitting at the airport in Detroit, no planes. Miriam Popak, sie soll sein gesund. She was the head of Neshei Chabad out-of-town conventions at the time. Now her daughter, Mrs. Feldman, took over. She went to the telephone and she called New York. Rabbi Klein answers the phone and she says, we're stuck in Detroit. And Rabbi Klein said, ein minute, and he goes to the Rebbe and he comes back and he says, the Rebbe will wissen, was heißt stuck. So Mrs. Popak is explaining the word stuck. So Rabbi Klein, and she keeps asking for quarters and dimes and nickels, ching, 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 ching. None of you know what I'm talking about, right? You have cell phones. And she's explaining was heißt stuck. And he says, the Rebbe weiß was heißt stuck. The Rebbe knows the translation of the word. The Rebbe hat gesagt, as a Id is kein Mal nit stuck. That a Jew is never stuck. So if you're in Detroit at the airport, you're not stuck. You need to be there. The women ran around the airport giving out Shabbos candles. There are women all over the United States today that are lighting Shabbos candles because the Nishi group, this is what they called us, instead of Neshei, the Nishi group was stuck in Detroit, Michigan. Aid is kein Mal nit stuck. If you're somewhere, that's where you're supposed to be.
Okay, so that's an example. What does that story show us? What was the Rebbe giving that idea through this?
Everything has a purpose.
As far as the Rebbe was concerned, there's no such thing as being stuck. Wherever a person is, that is where you're supposed to be. And that's a life art. That's an art. To live with the perspective and to live purposely, to figure out that wherever you are supposed to be, that is where you are supposed to be. And that there is that place, there is a mission to accomplish. I want to say that is based upon a teaching. And the teaching is from the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. And the Baal Shem Tov teaches us that hashkacha pratit, which means divine providence, doesn't just mean that Hashem created the world, Hashem is in control of the world, but rather, what did the Baal Shem Tov teach us? Baal Shem Tov taught us that every moment and every detail and every single thing that happens in the world is orchestrated from above. And the example he gave is, while he was teaching this, is that he turned to the leaf that was falling from a tree. And he says to his students, follow that leaf. And so his students followed the leaf. And they saw that the leaf fell on the ground. And then a wind came and blew the leaf and it went from place to place until eventually they saw that between the two trees in the heart of the heat was a snail that was crossing to go from one shaded area to the other shaded area. But it took for a snail a long path in the heat. And as they followed the blowing of the wind, what did they find? That the wind blew that leaf onto the snail, and providing the shade that that snail needed for that moment, for when it was crossing. In other words, the Baal Shem Tov was showing that something as mundane, as simple as you might cross it off to think of that as inconsequential, as a leaf falling from a tree, it's orchestrated from above. And how much more so that is true with a leaf on the tree, how much more so that every moment, every second of every turn, every circumstance, every situation that we find ourselves in is because God brings us to that situation. God presents us with that situation. And therefore, as the Rebbe says, we're not stuck. We're not there just because of some delay or this or that. God brought you. There's no such thing as you're stuck in a situation. You're supposed to be there. And another teaching that I loved, and I think it's very appropriate for this time, and I mentioned it in my Rosh Hashanah sermon, is that we say the Shema 3 times a day. In the Shema, we say, V'yavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha v'chol ma'odecha, which means you should love Hashem, your God, with all your heart, with all your might, and all your soul. So the question the sages ask is, what does it mean with all your heart? What, you're going to love God with half your heart, with a quarter of your heart? What does it mean b'chol levavecha, with all your heart? Just say with your heart. Or what does it mean, all your heart? So Rashi says, b'chol levavecha means she'ena choylek al hamakom, that you shouldn't argue. You shouldn't be your heart shouldn't be in half. Your heart should not argue or disagree or divide your heart with God. That it should be one with God. And I believe, if I remember now, I just said it a few weeks ago. I can't remember. I think it was the Karlina that says a beautiful word on that, a beautiful old tape, is that there's many ways to describe God's name, right? There's Hashem, there's Elokecha, my God. But how does Rashi word the term, don't let your heart be divided with God, with the term makom, which means place. Now that's a term that we refer to God. That's many places we refer to God as makom, the place, because essentially God fills all space, so God is the space. But he mentioned, why did Rashi choose to describe God in that term with the place, makom, is to teach us that often in life we find ourselves in all different types of places, right? And we don't like that space. We're not comfortable with that space, whether that space be the circumstances that we are now, whether it be being delayed from a flight, whether it be between a job, whether it be, I'm not just talking about a physical space, but I'm talking about all types of space. And we argue with that space. We say, now I don't mean to say that one should always strive to do better and to make your space better. But realize that wherever you are, whatever space you are at the moment is you, that's the space you're meant to be. There's a reason. God orchestrates everything. So don't argue with the space. Always strive to go to a better space and be a better space, but don't argue with that space. So that's the perspective. Meaning, don't ever think that you're stuck in a space. That space wasn't there for no reason. The space is there for a purpose. On that perspective, I want to share with you another story, even though I didn't bring it into this class, but I think as well as it gives us a perspective of another thing is that those are certainly circumstances that are beyond our control. But even in circumstances that are within our control, there's a story of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and unfortunately, you've all heard of Rabbi Jonathan. Now he's a sir. He was knighted by the Queen. Rabbi Jonathan. Huh? No, many years ago he was already knighted. But Rabbi Jonathan Sachs was the past chief rabbi of England. And now that we mention his name, he actually last week announced that unfortunately he's ill with yellow machla, with cancer. So may he have a complete refuah shlema. But Rabbi Jonathan Sachs is a well-known chief rabbi. I'm not going to get into the whole story, but he was, a typical English boy. His family was somewhat traditional, but certainly not like very religious or anything like that. And he was a very smart kid. He went to Cambridge University. He was studying philosophy. And in his summer, he decided that he wanted to go search, and with all these questions, philosophical questions, and seek out, he was in America, different Jewish leaders and get their perspective. Any case, to cut a long story short, someone suggested that he go see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And usually, especially in those times, the Rebbe was still seeing people that you could have a one-on-one audience with the Rebbe, but it was something that you had to book months in advance. But he calls up 770 saying he wants a meeting with the Rebbe. To make a long story short, he gets a meeting miraculously, and he's on a Greyhound bus, and he goes to see the Rebbe. He comes to the Rebbe with all these philosophical questions, asking the Rebbe one after the other. The Rebbe politely and answers him with everything. And then the Rebbe did something that no one, after he tells the story, he says that no one else had done. And he says he reverses the roles. And he tells Jonathan Sachs, he says, now tell me, you're a student at Cambridge University. And he says, yes. He says, tell me, how many Jewish students are there? And he starts to questioning him. So instead of now the Rebbe starts questioning Jonathan Sachs. And he starts asking him how many Jewish students are there, and about Jewish life at Cambridge University, and if the students eat kosher food, etc. And then he says and Jonathan Sachs is answering, how things are. He never even thought in his wildest dream about the situation about Judaism in Cambridge University. He never saw himself as any sort of role. And then the Rebbe turns to him and he says, tell me, what are you doing for Jewish life on Cambridge University? Now, Jonathan Sachs had never even thought a second before that meeting about what his role for Jewish life is. He never saw himself as that. So as an English boy, he tried to dodge the question politely, and he starts saying, well, Rebbe, the circumstances that I find myself in, and the Rebbe stops him and interrupts him. And this is why I'm saying the story. And the Rebbe says to him, young man, a Jew never finds himself in a circumstance. A Jew puts himself in a circumstance. And if you put yourself in one circumstance, you can always put yourself in another. And the Rebbe said that meeting this Jonathan Sachs changed his life. He went back to Cambridge, and eventually, long story short, that's what he saw himself more in an instrumental leadership role. And eventually he changed his course of life. He didn't become the philosopher and lawyer, he became a rabbi and eventually the chief rabbi of England. But that line of saying that a Jew never finds himself in a circumstance is very similar to the thinking of, we don't see ourselves as stuck in a circumstance. You don't see yourself as found in a circumstance. You see yourself as put by, whether you put yourself in that circumstance or whether God essentially orchestrated, even if you think you put yourself in that circumstance. But you were put in a circumstance, and therefore you could always find yourself out of the circumstance, or you could find the meaning within that circumstance. So that's lesson number one. Now, one of the greatest challenge, by the way, anyone can say any comments or questions as we go along. One of the greatest challenge to find in that equilibrium when things are not going the way we expect, and we have things that disrupt our lives, is especially now as things have been continuously going, and that is how long it can last. How long will the period? You know, even now that maybe you got your mind over the grips of the lockdown and all that, you've come to terms with it, and you're happy with yourself or this or that, how you've come to it. But still, like, how long is it going to be? How long is things? And in a sense, we have no idea. All the experts and all this, where the next week we're going to have and how things are going to come back, and whether they're going to come back, and the vaccine or this, essentially no one knows, right? So how do we, that's one of the hardest ways, is not being that we don't know how things are going to turn out. So it makes us in a feeling that, okay, right now I can handle the situation, right? But I feel like I'm not here and I'm not there. I'm in between. And that is very hard for people to be in between. It's very hard to do what you need to do, be constructive in life when you in between places. So the following story of the Rebbe, of another student of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe given perspective, is how the proper way to think about things when we are in situations of uncertainty. And again, I found the person himself saying the story, which is always better, which I will share with you now.
Rabbi Avraham Glick has served as a Chabad emissary to Melbourne, Australia for close to 5 decades. In 1970, he served as an emissary to Worcester, Massachusetts.
Close to 2 years after we were in Worcester, I received a request from Rabbi Groner, Rabbi Yitzchak David Groner from Melbourne, to come to Australia. And he had a position for us there, and he asked us to relocate. We should come to Australia as shluchim. There had been discussion about moving to Australia, and the Rebbe was very involved in that, just in guiding us and different indications that eventually our shlichus would be in Australia. So when I received that offer to come to Australia, I asked the Rebbe, obviously, and the Rebbe said yes, that I should accept that offer and to go to Australia. But he said at the time not to go now, but to wait until after the following Tishrei, the Yom Tovim. He wanted we should be in Worcester and over Yom Tov, and then to go to Australia after Tishrei. During that time, after I'd received that answer, I was in Yechidus for my Yom Haledes, which was in Tammuz, Tafshin Lamed, and I wrote to the Rebbe that I was sort of confused about what my role should be in Worcester at the moment. We knew, because the Rebbe had indicated to us and told us that we should move back to Australia, and that was really my focus at the time, thinking about Australia and moving here. But I was still in Worcester, and I just didn't feel that I could take on any new sort of projects, really just winding things down, I suppose. That's the way I viewed it. And I felt at the time that I was more or less in no man's land. They would say, "Nicht dahin und nicht daher." I was just treading water there in Worcester. And the Rebbe looked at me, and it was almost as though he was amazed that I could ask such a question. That he said, in the Torah, we find that the Yidden, in their journeys through the Midbar, would sometimes set up the Mishkan just for one day and then take it apart, which was obviously very large, very big avodah, and to set up the whole Mishkan and then take it apart just for one day. But for that day, it was considered a kvius, that they were there as though they were there permanently, with regard to kama v'kama dinim, the Rebbe said. Mamela, therefore, a Yid gefindt sich in an Ort, afilo auf ein Tag, darf das sein in a Neufen von kvius. If you're found in a place, even if it's just for one day, then you have to be there as though you're permanently there. You're fixed. It's not, and the Rebbe continued, als if jemand steht mit a gepackte Chamedan, great rauszufahren. So the Rebbe made it very, very clear to me that if you're in Worcester now, even if it's just for one day, then why are you confused about your role? You're there, even if it's for one day. It has to be in a manner which is kavua, and that became a hirav to me, and hopefully to everyone for our avodah.
Okay, so again, this is a paradigm shift in our thinking that the Rebbe was showing us how to think. And that is that in life, whenever we have these feelings that we're in a transient moment, and we have to look at, the Rebbe tells us never to look at any moment as transient. That, and it's very true, because if you think about it, you can never compare your mindset and your level of your emotions and energetic investment that you give to a situation, that you see, when you see that situation as a temporary situation, as compared to when you see it as a permanent situation. For example, when you're staying in a hotel room, right? You would never in your wildest dreams think of, baking a cake for the neighbor next door. Or you got to become friends with your neighbor the next door. Why? Because you know that you're there for the night, and that's it. Who cares who's next door, right? So our emotions, our mental, our material, our spiritual investment in any situation, if you think about it, is really always dependent of how you see that situation. Is whether you see that situation, and very much depends on how invested you are in a situation, very much depends on how you see the situation, whether you see it as temporary or permanent. And therefore, and how you, whether you see it as temporary and permanent, is going to contribute to where you're going to focus on in your life. Whether you're going to see this moment as just as a pause moment, or an auxiliary moment, and things in your life change. The Rebbe taught us that we got to have a paradigm shift in our thinking when it comes to every moment in our life. That every moment is not a transient moment, that it's not an out of the way moment. And as much as it may seem like that, we have to, even though it may seem very temporary, we have to look at every moment with permanence. We have to see every moment as a new moment, as an opportunity, as a mission. that there's a hidden purpose. And thereby, when we look at that moment, even though it could be 100% true that it's the moment of, for example, and in general, it goes to the way you value your time. Every moment that if you would, the Rebbe used to say that the world says time is money. But I say time is life. If we would value time as we value money, your life would be totally different. Imagine if every day you would imagine that the seconds of your day that you were given were like money that was deposited into your bank account and that you need to use up. How many seconds are there in the day? Any 39,000 or something?
Well, it's 60 seconds in a minute.
60,
You don't do the math.
and how many minutes in an hour?
60.
60, all right? And there's 24 hours.
Right.
Right? So whatever the math, I think it's about 39,000 something. Can't remember the. So if you can imagine that someone deposited in your ATM, in your account, $39,000, and you got to utilize every single one of it. Otherwise, tomorrow you won't have that $39,000, right? You would spend every single second of the day figuring out how to spend that. That's what life is. We have for a limited basis. We have a job to do. We have a purpose. And a God deposits into us every single day those moments. So either we could use those moments diverting our energy and diverting our time and this and that on other things. Now, not to say that there's no such thing as downtime. A person can have downtime. But even that downtime needs to be looked at as that downtime is for what? For what purpose? If this downtime is just for the purpose of downtime and there's no other purpose, then you're not utilizing your time. That downtime needs to be there in order that my next time, my uptime should be more valued. So then, therefore, that downtime that I had, there was a purpose, there was meaning. Right? It's perspective. Any comments? Okay.
I have one comment, Moshe, one comment. You can use every minute of every day, as you say, like a bank account. But there are times when you have to stop and you have to think. And you have to stop and think where you are, where you're going, where you've been.
Good.
And you can't just draw it out like a bank account.
Yes, but that's utilizing your time. If it's done productively.
No, that's not. That's using, like on a TV set, the pause button.
No, what I'm saying is, first of all, number one is, if every single day you're going to be starting to calculate your time, right? Like in a business, if every day you're going to just keep on doing your accounts and not actually doing any sales, right? You're not getting anywhere. But if you're only doing sales and you never stop for a second to do an accounting of where things are, where energy is being spent and where things are, you're also in trouble because you may be spending on the wrong things. You may be wasting time on the wrong things and selling and things that are making profit you're not ready to focus on, etc., etc. So you need both, right? You need times when you do focus on where I'm going, what I'm doing now. But you need times that you're being productive, right? So you need both. And on top of that, in order to be productive, we're not machines that can just operate 24 hours. We do need downtime, both when it comes to physically time and both when it comes to mentally time. But if which is perfectly fine and perfectly good, but you should know that those pauses and those downtimes is there with an objective. That I'm meaning to say, when I'm sleeping, right? I'm sleeping in order to get, a person who is a profession as a lawyer, right? So say he goes to work from 9 to 5, okay? What does he call himself? What's his profession? A lawyer. What about if he sleeps from 10 o'clock at night until 6 in the morning? How many hours is that?
8.
8. So he's sleeping more than he's working. Or he's working only from 9 to 5. So is he more of a sleeper or is he more of a lawyer? He's a lawyer. The fact that he's sleeping doesn't take away from maybe he's even sleeping or that more than he's working, doesn't mean that he's a sleeper. What it really means is that he's sleeping in order that he should be able to function the next day as a lawyer, right? So what I mean, the reason why I'm bringing that example is that if it's necessary, of course, there's, everyone is different and everyone is this, and we have to work out that on your own. But I'm saying even that downtime, if it's using if it's using to be better or to bring in purpose for the time when I'm in time, then that's good. That means that you're utilizing that moment for what it is. But if that downtime starts to become the pause button as a distraction, as a way of an escape from doing what I'm meant to be doing, from doing the productive, right? As the pause button, as the time where I'm stuck or the time where I'm thinking, and it's more of an escape to life than really what it is. Because what's the point of investing all my energy or working in this point? Because in any case, this job is temporary. In any case, I'm going to be moving to Australia in a month. So my head's there, my head's not here. Then you've lost the value of the moment. The value that God put you in that. You understand?
Yeah.
There was once a story. There was once I forgot which. I think it was the Levi Yitzchak. Forgot which Rebbe, but the guy comes to shul and he's praying, and for the past 45 minutes, an hour, and the Rebbe comes over to him and he says, "Welcome back." He says to him, "What do you mean, Rebbe? I've been here for the past 45 minutes. What do you mean, welcome back? Where did I go?" He says, "Welcome back from the big town that where they did all their merchandise, the big city, the marketplace." So he says, "Welcome back from the marketplace." So he says, "What do you mean? I've been here all the time." So the Rebbe was saying, "Welcome back," because physically he was here, but his mind was all over the place, thinking about the stock market, thinking about what he has to do today, this or that, instead of being here praying to God. It looked like he was praying in the siddur, but his mind was really somewhere else, right, in the marketplace. So the Rebbe was saying, "Welcome back." Now you're here. In other words, that's also another thing about utilizing our moments. If our headspace is not utilized, and even it could be as mundane as, sometimes going to the dentist and you've got 15 minutes wait. And instead of utilizing that time, what do we say? "Oh, I've got 15 minutes to kill. So I go on my cell phone and I look at my Facebook and I do this and I do that." Now, again, time for leisure and time for things is not a bad thing. We all need it. But if it becomes that any spare moment you have, that's where you run into, then you got to think to yourself, am I escaping from life, or am I utilizing every moment of my life to better and to do the purpose I'm doing? Right? So in other words, it's how you look at your moment. You have to value your moment. And instead, you could think about using those 15 minutes not to kill, but even if it's taken out, you say, I have 15 minutes, maybe I can learn and study in those 15 minutes. Maybe there's a job that I need, something that I can utilize, or even if it's, say, now going to the dentist. So say for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to think about my teeth and think about why Hashem gave me teeth, and think about thank God I'm here because I don't have to, the troubles that others go through the teeth. Start meditating about those things and being grateful about the teeth that you do have, etc., etc. Utilize those times. Okay, that's a perspective. Now let's go into the third section of the class. Is that what about? We talked about applying divine providence to all our situations in life, and both those transcendental moments in life. But what about moments that present us with real crisis and challenges? How do we look at those moments and the divine providence in those? How are we meant to deal with those moments that bring pain and suffering? So this is a story of a rabbi, a chassid of the Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon Jacobson. So he was his father was a journalist. The Jacobsons are very interesting chassidim. His father was a journalist of a Yiddish newspaper called the Allgemeine Journal. Some of you who knew back in the day, was a very prominent Yiddish paper.
Still is.
And now it turned into an English paper and it's online. But and he was close with the Rebbe, and his son, Rabbi Simon Jacobson, used to be there when the Rebbe would farbreng. Afterwards, there was again on Shabbat. Most of the times, the Rebbe's talks were on Shabbos or Chagim, where we weren't allowed to tape record. So they would have people that would memorize everything that the Rebbe spoke about, and after Shabbos they would revise over it and transcribe it into writing and send it into the Rebbe. He was one of them. And when the Rebbe passed away, he wrote a very good book, another beautiful book about the Rebbe's teachings in English. And in fact, JLI, maybe the next course we do will be this course, has a course on that book, and it's called Toward a Meaningful Life. I've given it to some of you to read. It's a very good book, Toward a Meaningful Life. But in any case, this Reb Simon Jacobson, his father was hospitalized, had some sickness and had to be hospitalized, and he had to be in the hospital over the high holidays, over Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. And Erev Yom Kippur, we know that one of the customs the Rebbe did was, it's a Jewish custom that you go to the rabbi of the city and get a piece of honey cake, lekach. The Rebbe, Erev Yom Kippur, would give out honey cake. People would line up for lines. And the Rebbe gave this son of this Rabbi Gershon Jacobson, who was in hospital, a piece of cake. And when he gave him the honey cake, he said, give this to your father, and may God bless him with the Shana Tova, with a happy and sweet year. And then he says, and tell your father that when he finishes his shlichut, his mission for which he was sent to the hospital, God will set him free from there. When he finishes his mission that he was sent to the hospital, God will send him free. The son went, relayed the message to his father, and his father went and there started making conversation with the doctors, with the fellow patients about their spiritual well-being. And the day after Yom Kippur, the secretary of the Rebbe, the Rebbe sent his personal secretary to go and visit this Rabbi Jacobson. And the first question the secretary had from the Rebbe was, the Rebbe wants to know, have you completed your mission here? And years later, the son, Rabbi Jacobson, when telling the story, said years later, even after his father had passed, the family would hear from the doctors who said that their conversations with this man deeply touched them, and they were amazed how this man, even in the pain that he was going through, was able to have such conversations with them during his time in the hospital. That's the story. Now, the story, you can imagine, the guy's stuck in hospital. The guy's in pain. He's suffering, right? It's the last place he wants to be. He wants to be home with his family for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur. And yeah, the last thing he's thinking about is what can he do in the hospital? The last thing he's thinking about is maybe he should go and talk to the doctor about putting on tefillin, or the fellow patients, or the nurses. I don't think that was the first thing on his mind. But here he gets the Rebbe's message, and he starts to see his place as a mission. That there's nurses here, there's doctors here, there's individuals. There's a reason why I'm here. The Rebbe says there's a mission here. And the Rebbe says, as soon as you've done your mission, then you want me to be there anymore, right? So he starts to talk to the individuals. What if we are able to look at things in life like that? What a way of elevation. To realize that even my medical conditions is all a pretext for the real mission waiting to be accomplished. Everything that I'm here, in other words, is, and by the way, there's no point in reasoning, because we're not privileged to know reasons. God doesn't give us the script, right? It's God. We're not here to answer the script. We're here to do. But what about if we're able to look at those things and to say, you know, even the place where I am, even in these dark places, there's a reason. It's all a pretext. Another point to think about is many people would have viewed their time in hospital due to a medical condition. They would view that time as, you know, a pause in normal life, an aberration, a setback, an unfortunate setback, or an occupational hazard in life, right? People get sick. It's part of life, right? If at all possible, we should never want these situations, God forbid. No one should ever have any situation like that. We avoid all these situations or at least, please God, reduce any of these situations. And we should never view them, they should never be anyone's mission in life, right? But the way the Rebbe viewed it was based upon Kabbalah. In Kabbalah, it says that there are sparks in this world, and our duty is to bring out those sparks, to refine those sparks. There are certain sparks that we need to seek out, right? Those are the sparks that fall within natural boundaries, parameters, and that's a person's life goal, a life mission, what he needs to accomplish in the world. But the Rebbe taught us as well is that there are certain situations where the sparks seek us out. They come our way. They seek us. And therefore, we should realize that these are also opportunities. We may have never planned them. We may have never asked for them. We may never ever wanted them, and we don't want them again. But they're here. They're there. We didn't choose them. They were given to us. And therefore, even in those situations, to realize that there's what to do there as well. And for that, I'll share with you this last story. In the mid-1970s, during the early years of Rabbi Yisrael and Vivi Darren's shlichut, they were sent as Chabad emissaries to a city called Stamford, Connecticut. Sarah knows this city. She lives nearby. And one of their children became very ill and was in hospital. It's actually, they have their life story is actually a very sad story. They had two children that were sick for many, many years, and both passed away later in their lives. They had to bury two children. So this one child was very sick in hospital for a long time. And while they had other children at home, including a baby, so one parent had to be with the sick child in the hospital, another parent had to remain home. It was obviously a very trying, challenging time for everyone. And to take care of the family was very difficult. So during this time, Rabbi Darren called the Rebbe's secretary, as he would usually do, to report to the Rebbe about his activities. And he humbly reported to the secretary that because of his son's condition, that month he had spent most his time in the hospital. And unfortunately, many of the projects got neglected. The secretary, the line went quiet, and the secretary responded. Many times, by the way, the Rebbe was on the other line when people would speak to the Rebbe's secretary. And the secretary said, the Rebbe said that certainly the Eibishter, God didn't make such a thing happen so that you should suffer or be anguished because of it. Surely you have a shlichus to do there. Go and find it and do it. That was the Rebbe's words to him. But Darren got the message and began reaching out to Jews in the hospital. Started rapping tefillin, started giving words of inspiration, providing comfort for people that needed it. And one conversation, and what did that conversation do to this rabbi? His whole idea is like, my whole shlichus, my whole work as a Rebbe's emissary is on hold because I have a sick child and that's where I need to be. Obviously, that's his provenance. But what did the Rebbe's show you is, yes, that's where you need to be, but that doesn't mean that you need to sit there and be sad and can't do anything. That's now your shlichut. That's now your work. That's your purpose, right? And therefore, he realized that every moment is part of the work, is part of your divine purpose. Okay. Now, in summation of today's positivity outlook, bias, whenever or wherever or however or whomever we are with, there is a convergence of two narratives, the human experience and the divine. We must never confuse the causes of life, detours, with their reason. There are many circumstantial causes that contribute to detours in life, but there's always only one reason, and that is because God has a plan for me at any point, at any place, and at any time. And with that perspective, it allows us to maximize our and optimize life's transient moments, life's transient moments, and to infuse them with a higher perspective and a higher purpose. So here are the takeaways. You can write them down and utilize them to think about after the class. Number one, think back to a moment or situation in your life that wasn't planned and seemed at the time to derail your hopes, your ambitions, your dreams, your plans. And think about how you reacted to them then. And now, after tonight's class, think about, based upon these Rebbe's teachings, about the Rebbe's outlook, think about how you may have reacted differently, or what may have been a better approach to approach them with the Rebbe's approach about divine providence. Okay, so that's question number one. Question number two takeaway is, how might we apply the perspectives that we learned today to our current situation, our situation that we're in now? In particular, what are actions that we can take or changes that we can make in our current attitude or behavior based upon principles that we outlined above? So I guess it's a question, one, to look back and one to look forward. Tools that you can make for yourself to look forward, to keep that perspective in mind when things do happen, detours. All right. Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you.
Very different. Very different.
Thank you.
Very good.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Moshe.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good week.
Good job.
Have a good week.